Okay, so this is a video going over three different ways of programming, and the reason why I'm putting this together is because I feel that sometimes as coaches and also as athletes, we can just sort of focus on training in the same way and with the same level of intensity for different parts of our training. Things that are going to be important, things that are going to be less important, and then sometimes this just leads to sort of burning out or not necessarily approaching our training in the right way. So I'm going to go over three different gears of programming. So gear one is going to be something which is super specific, very important, it's a high priority for that athlete. Gear two is going to be something which is always moving in the background. It's something that we're always trying to develop, but it's not necessarily going to be something that has a focused training progression on it. However, it's in some form of continuous progression. And then gear number three is just going to be general training. This is going to be support work. This is stuff that's not necessarily important. And I'm going to show you sort of three different ways of structuring this and then also viewing it over the course of 6 weeks. So we're going to start in reverse order. So gear number three, which is going to be more of your general training. This is going to be things that are constantly moving on in the background, which we're not necessarily paying too much attention to. It's just important that we get something in of this nature. So over this course of 6 weeks, we're going to be looking at core work, and for the first 3 weeks we have a hanging leg raise, and then for the second 3 weeks we've got a strict toes to bar. So the movement gets difficult going into sort of the next 3 week phase, but then as well as that we have some natural progression within the prescription as well. So we're always doing 3 rounds. So what can be quite good is just to have a static volume here. So it could be 2 sets, 3 sets, something along those lines. I wouldn't recommend doing anything more than that. For this type of stuff, it's going to be at the end of the training session. It doesn't take up too much time. And in week number 1, you're working at 2 to 3 reps in reserve. And then week number 2, it's 2 reps in reserve. And then week 3, 1 to 2 reps in reserve. So we're in a productive range here. But at the same time, these numbers could end up being exactly the same week to week. So an athlete might be able to hit 10 reps in their first week, and they might be able to feel that they could do 12 reps. And then in the next week, they repeat that performance. And then in the final week, they may feel a bit tired and they're not necessarily able to get beyond that 10 reps. But to be honest with you, it doesn't really matter that much. And I think that what can happen sometimes is that people try to force progression where it doesn't necessarily need to happen. And for these parts of your training, this more sort of general approach, this is GPB. It's going to rotate every couple of weeks. It doesn't matter too much what you're doing. A lot of this stuff is done to offset the training that you have in the sport anyway. So for example, if you're constantly in positions of extension, which happens a lot with barbell athletes and CrossFit athletes, we're going overhead, we're driving a lot of extension to stand up a bar out of the back squat, that type of stuff. What can be good is working in the opposite way and going through more positions of flexion. So doing something like a hanging leg raise where you're bringing those legs up and you're going to create more flexion going on at the lower back, doing something like a Jefferson curl. The goal isn't necessarily to become the world champion at those exercises. It's just to offset what we are obviously doing a lot of in our sport anyway. So that's gear number 3. Gear number 2 is going to be something which is always happening in our training. There's going to be phases where you might want to push it and you might want to progress it, but you're more or less going to be just going through some iteration of a progression with these movements or with this type of work. So for weightlifting, for a CrossFit athlete, let's just say the snatch could be one of those. You're going to snatch 1 time a week, maybe you snatch twice a week, but you're always trying to sort of bring that number up. There's going to be certain periods of time where you do it in a more focused way. There's going to be other periods of time where you might be working more variations. But this type of stuff needs a bit more attention, but it doesn't necessarily need to be forced progression at the same time. So in this situation, what we would do is we would have a general broad prescription for week number 1, and then we would go week to week, and we would just make sure that the athlete is nudging themselves a little bit further, or we're just creating a bit of a goal which might be a little bit harder, but it's not too out of reach, and we're not necessarily trying to push that performance in any way. So as the example here, we got snatch 6 to 10 sets of 2 reps at 65 to 85%. So this is very much up to the athlete how they approach it. They've got a 20% range in terms of the weights that they can hit. And then as well as that, they've got, the difference between 12 reps and 20 total reps. So if they have 100 kg max and their results for the first week are 65, 70, 75, 77, 80, 82, and 85 kilos, this is a pretty good way of building up. We can see they've done 7 sets and they've been working within that range. And then for the next week, what we can do is we can give them a target. So we could say for the next week, we give them the same prescription. And what we would do in this situation is we would say, for example, a good goal for this might be aim for more sets at 80% or above this week. And then as they go through that next workout, they have a bit more of a target. So they could approach the build up in exactly the same way. So let's say, for example, they do that. And, what we could say is that they just spend a little bit more time at 80, 82. So now they've done 9 sets and they've just done 2 extra sets, one at 80% and one at 82%. So we now have this progression, and for the following week, we could write exactly the same and they could go for that extra set. Or what we could do is we could get their prescription and adjust it slightly and just create a bit of a bigger goal. And in my experience, both in coaching and also in my own training, I think it's always better to try and push up that bottom number rather than pushing up that top number. Because I think we tend to focus so much on pushing the top number, and sometimes it doesn't work out, and that can lead to getting frustrated about the training or something along those lines. Whereas if we're pushing our bottom numbers up, this is an easier challenge for us, and it does have positive effects. Now, say for example, we had a progression where, okay, over the next 6 weeks, we will try to increase your max snatch, or we will try to increase your ability to lift within 90% or above. In that situation, we might start to move that top number up. But I think for gear number 2 and progressions where you're paying attention to it, but you're not necessarily trying to drive it all the time, in those situations, I think it would be better to try and raise the bottom and allow that to push further performance as you go forward, okay? And I think generally as well for CrossFit athletes, bringing up people's bottom numbers is going to be a really worthwhile pursuit as well, and building up that consistency as athletes get more towards 80% and above. Okay, so now going into gear number 3, this is going to be for training progressions which you are really going to focus on, and this is going to be where you have an end goal. Now, most programming is written this way. Most programming is written as you sort of start with the end, and then you reverse engineer everything. So if we think about, say, strength training, we start off with a 1RM attempt or a max effort attempt, and then we go for, okay, in the week beforehand, they're doing a few doubles at, let's say, 90%. And then the week before, they're doing triples at 85%, or something along those lines. It could be, for example, you're doing a CrossFit Metcon, a benchmark workout or something like that, and you start off with the workout, a PB performance, and then in the week before that, you're doing a practice style workout with less weight or less reps. And the week before that, maybe you're doing it with easier movements. So this is generally how people approach their training. And one of the things I find that can be a bit of an issue is that they approach everything like this. Everything sort of has this end goal in mind, or you have everything sort of building up to this one end goal, and it can create a bit too much pressure, and it doesn't necessarily go with the everyday stresses and life and going on holiday or having a bad weekend or getting sick and all of these things that just can affect the training cycle. So being a bit more dynamic can be helpful. So in this situation, what I tend to do is I'll start off with the end in mind. So let's say in this we have a workout where it's 50 double unders, 15 muscle up, 50 double under, 10 muscle up, 50 double under, 5 muscle up. In that workout, the goal there is, let's do, I've misspelled muscle. The goal is to do 30 muscle ups with some form of interference and some form of fatigue. And that's the end goal. So this is the workout that we're going to be building up towards. And then the first progression or the first week of that is going to be a 10-minute EMOM of 30 seconds ski erg at a tough effort. Then you're going in on the second minute and you're doing 5 unbroken muscle ups. So in this situation, we've accumulated 25 muscle ups done in sets of 5, and we also have 5 minutes worth of ski erg performed at a tough effort mixed in with that. So this would be something that you know that the athlete can do that is fairly manageable for them. And then what you would do is you would look to make this just like a little bit harder. So, for example, what we could do is we could say for the following week, rather than doing it in this EMOM structure, we could say, okay, the workout is going to be 5 rounds for time. You're going to do, let's say, 5 muscle ups. Let's make sure I spell it right this time. And then let's say 10 calorie ski erg. So the athlete can go into that on the second week and they know, okay, last week that I was getting X amount of calories or I was hitting X pace on the ski erg for this 30 seconds here. They will know what the combination of muscle ups and ski erg is going to feel like. And what they can do is they can give themselves some targets for that workout, or they have a good reference point so that they can go in and they can execute as best as they can. And then what you would do over the next few weeks is you would just try to nudge the workout more towards the end goal workout. So then, for example, we could change this workout up and we could start to include, or no, actually, instead of doing that, one thing we could do is very simply just change up the movements. So we stay at the same volume. Say, but now what we've done is we've just started to include double unders into the mix. So we've changed the ski erg for double unders. They're going to go into week 3, which would be this here. They know what this is going to feel like when it's with ski erg, and they're just going to make that switch. And the new challenge is performing it with the double under. And then as they go into week 4, they know what that feels like when they did it with the ski erg, and we're just switching it up. And then in week 5, you would just put a workout which would be somewhere in between these 2 workouts. And then that would be how you would progress someone through something which is a bit more high stakes, a bit more of a priority. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the athlete to reach for those performances. And in this situation, what can be helpful is to sort of write it out a little bit ahead of plan, and not necessarily go through it as we did for the snatches, where we're looking at the result week to week and then we're adjusting the prescription based off of that. So the prescription is a bit tighter, it's a bit more specific, we're looking for a certain thing, and then what we're doing is we're making the athlete move on, make it a bit harder each time, give them a bit of a goal, but the goal is going to be less self-directed, and it's going to be more directed by the program itself or the workouts. Okay. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope that gives you some ideas for either your own training or your own programming. If you've got any questions or comments, put them into the comments, and I'm going to post this one up onto YouTube. Thank you.